Welcome to Always Be Looking with Alan Stein and my special guest, Mark Bullard. Today, we are talking about selling yourself in this job market. And with that, I want to introduce my guest today, Mark Bullard. Mark was a former Kadima client. Then we became friends. Now he is an amazing coach here at Kadima. He's focusing on one of his best superpowers, which is building relationships and anti-selling. And I'll hand it off to Mark to introduce himself here. Or Katie, actually, are you supposed to chime in first before I hand it off to Mark?
Let's let Mark introduce himself, and then I'll jump in with some housekeeping.
Yes, please.
That sounds good. Mark Bullard, and I am the anti-salesman, the reluctant salesman. You call me what you like. I got into sales by accident, but just discovered that sales doesn't have to be gross. It can actually be wonderful if you go about it the right way. And at the end of the day, if you are out there trying to market yourself for a new job, then that is sales. Whether you like it or not, that's what it is. So I want to talk about what I've learned in sales that's helped me in sales and how we can apply that to marketing ourselves.
Yes, and I can say a while ago, I talked to Mark about things I was feeling uncomfortable about selling myself. And I still remember that conversation, Mark, and it was very helpful to me. Quick housekeeping today. One, very glad to be here. We'll be talking about selling yourself in this market. We love questions, so please ask them. Alexis will be gathering them in the chat. We will be answering them at the end. And for those who stay to the end, we will be giving away our top 100 companies list, as well as our feedback form, where once again, we will be raffling off one of our mini courses, which are $100 value. One's on resume writing, the other's on LinkedIn profiles. So please stay and fill out our form. Mark, please tell us why job hunting is selling, whether you like it or not.
You bet. What do we mean by this? Job hunting is selling because at the end of the day, you are selling yourself. And I think Alan's going to talk about that a little bit more in a little bit here. But one thing that I've noticed is even if people are good at selling other things, they're often not good at selling themselves. There's an old saying, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. And I think it's just reflecting this particular truth that people have a hard time selling themselves. They don't want to promote themselves. One of the biggest feedbacks that I hear from people when we talk about this is, I don't want to annoy people. I don't want to bother them. So in light of that, I think it's important for people to understand how sales actually works and what that whole process looks like, because that is exactly what you're doing. You're offering to trade yourself, your time for money. And that's a sales process. What I found is that what worked for me in the sales process has worked for me in the job hunting process as well. A couple of key lessons that I've learned over that time is that you have to be more bold than you think. You need to be more ambitious and tenacious in terms of follow through and pursuit than you think, because what it takes to actually annoy someone is quite a bit more than what you're thinking. I think that's really key. Another piece that's very relevant from the sales role to selling yourself is dress for success. I found that if you want to get a loan from the bank, this is in the old days when you'd walk into a bank to get a loan, you wanted to dress like you didn't need the money, because people want to give something to someone that doesn't need it. It's easy because you assume they're going to take good care of it. I think that looking for a job is the same kind of thing. Oftentimes these days when you're looking for a job, you're doing it from home. And so I found in my sales career that when I was working from home, which I did a lot over the last 25 years, that no matter what, I would never wake up and just be wearing pajamas. Just despite the kind of the jokes about working from home and the kind of simplicity of that, I would always dress like I'm walking into a meeting because it put me in that frame of mind. And I think doing the same thing when you're looking for a job is the same thing. You get up, you get ready, just like you're going to work, and then you go into wherever your office is. It might be the kitchen, it might be the garage, it might be the attic, it might be a closet. I've seen all of those. But wherever you do it like you're going to win. So those are a couple of the kind of key things where I feel like sales and selling yourself is important.
Yeah, and I think dressing the part is so critical. So right now I dress like a schlub because I wear a t-shirt, hoodies, all that stuff. But whenever I was interviewing for jobs, I would actually have my shirt off to the side. I don't have it here anymore because I'm not interviewing anymore actively. And I would just put my shirt on. And especially when you're virtual, all you need to do is the top half. And you want to dress at least one level above the type of individual that you're meeting with. So I don't want to get too much into the dress, but people should not do as I do now. But what Mark is wearing is totally acceptable if you're going for most sort of jobs outside of like maybe C-suite level executives.
I would always recommend dressing one level up. So whatever you're like applying for, whatever kind of role you're looking at, dress a level up from that, and then you'll always be confident. I'd always rather be overdressed than underdressed.
Yeah. Yes, and don't have your dog walker come when you're interviewing. But another thing here, before we flip to the next slide, I like this perspective of the job hunt, the analogy of like a salesperson. Although as we talk about this in some slides coming up, I like to call it more renting yourself rather than selling yourself. You are never owned by a company. That company does not own you, and they do not owe you a job either. So you are rented by them essentially. And we'll talk about that on some coming slides.
Yeah.
So, Alan, what is TAS?
Yes. So TAS is a good segue from renting yourself. And for those of you out there that sell software or have bought software or are familiar with the term SaaS or software as a service, that is what Salesforce does. That is what Tableau does. Every company rents their software as a service. And similarly, you as an individual, your assets are the skills, the impact that you bring to the table. So you are essentially talent as a service. You are getting your annual contract from that company in the form of salary. You are getting upkeep, like maintenance and other things in terms of benefits, in terms of bonuses. And if you consider yourself software and selling into a company to pay for you, you also need to focus on being retained, because you can be churned. The company can choose to buy another software or just get rid of you as a software. So if you think about yourself as a service and you think about yourself as these companies think about, like Microsoft or Salesforce or SAP or Oracle, these companies are always either trying to add value so that they can continue to charge increased prices, or they also have a pipeline of different customers so that they are not only reliant on one or two customers to pay their annual service costs. So I'm going a little bit too deep into the SaaS versus TaaS model, but you as a commodity, as a very valuable commodity, are selling yourself, are renting yourself, and you should be getting paid in return for the value that you bring. Mark, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
I was just going to say there's two things that come to mind when I think of like TaaS, right? In the way that you're describing it. One is that because I've sold a lot of software as a service. And so one of the most important things there is stickiness. You want to distinguish what you're doing as unique and different than what anybody else is doing. And so I would say the same thing is true when you're looking for an opportunity to exchange your time for money. You want to establish yourself as being unique, being different. The other thing I would say from my experience selling software and working on $1 million deals with Fortune 500 companies is that you want to set expectations right. When I was selling, one of the most important things to me was I wanted to make sure that once we agreed to do something together, and whether it's software or I'm going to work for you, that I've set the right expectations with you, you've set the right expectations with me, then we're very likely to have a really good relationship. So some people say that good fences make good friends. That's about setting expectations. But when it comes to selling yourself as a service, if you approach the job search from the standpoint of I'm going to maximize, I'm going to get the highest paying job I can get, then you may in fact land that, but then be very unhappy. If you look at it from the standpoint of I'm going to find the best possible fit, then you're going to very likely be much more satisfied. And that goes both ways. So if you're more satisfied, quite likely the other side will also be more satisfied. You can look forward to a richer, longer career. I worked on selling some deals 10 years ago that are still with the same software company, which is much longer than normal. It's because we set the expectations right at the beginning and established a pattern for a really good long career. So yeah, I think that's super relevant. There's lots of correlations, or not correlations, but relationships there.
And the other thing that's important is any of these software products have multiple customers. And while you won't be working for multiple different companies, you should have a pipeline at the ready to rent your services to other folks if your current employer no longer wants to pay for your services, or if you no longer want to get paid what your employer is paying you, then you have leverage externally by shopping around to other customers of your service.
Yeah. I think that actually bleeds in perfectly to the next topic, which is this ABCs. Yeah. If you have spent any time in sales, or perhaps if you are a fan of kind of dark movies, you may have seen Glengarry Glen Ross. And if you haven't seen the movie, you may very well have seen a meme related to Alec Baldwin here in this intense role. But he, in this scene, famously says, always be closing, ABC. And he makes a big scene of it. If you haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube. It's pretty crazy. That's a term that's been super popular in the world of sales for a long time. And at its core, there's nothing wrong with it. The idea is you should always be thinking about how to get to the next step. You should always be moving down the pipe. In that scene, in fact, he even says AIDA, attention, interest, decision, action. So that you want to think the same way in your sales process. However, always be closing does have some kind of sliminess to it, of somebody who's just like pushy, trying to get the deal done and not necessarily like connecting. And so let's take that and apply it to like yourself as you're selling your talent as a service. The new ABCs, according to Dan Pink in his awesome book called To Sell is Human, which, by the way, the whole notion of that book is that essentially everyone is in sales. If you're trying to convince your toddler to do something, you're in sales. If you're trying to get your teacher to give you a good grade, you're in sales. If you're trying to ask for a raise, you're in sales. If you're trying to get a budget, you're in sales. Those are all sales behaviors. And what he says, always be closing, that doesn't work. What does work is the new ABCs, which is attunement, buoyancy, and clarity. So just real briefly, attunement is just listening and paying attention. This is super, super relevant in selling your talent as a service. You want to make sure that you're aligning your talent to their needs. So that requires listening. If you meet somebody and you just start talking about all the great things you've done, that's not tremendously helpful. What is helpful is to ask them about what's happening in your business, what's going on in your world, what are your biggest challenges that you're trying to solve, and then be able to map, oh, that's interesting. I worked on something similar to that in this place. Now I'm aligning what my talent is and what my experience is to their interests, to their needs. So that's attunement. Buoyancy is about popping back up, right? So it's if you ever had the weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. There's those punching bags you had maybe back in, if you're like me and you had those punching bags back in the 70s, you like hit it and it goes down and then comes back up. I think in one movie, it famously knocks the kid over. In any event, that's buoyancy, right? It's the reality of sales is you're going to get a lot of no's. When it comes to selling your talent as a service, you only need one yes. You don't need 15 job offers. Wouldn't be bad if you had 15 job offers, because then you have some negotiating opportunity. But at the end of the day, you're only going to take one. So you really just need one really great opportunity, which is one difference between that and sales. But to get there, you're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to get a lot of no's early. You're going to get a lot of no's in the middle, and you're going to get some no's even near the end. But buoyancy is about coming back and coming back. To a certain degree, it's a numbers game. To a certain degree, you can do everything right and you still may not get it. There's always the possibility that there's another candidate that's a little bit better, or that they just happen to pick somebody else for a reason that's hard to understand. So buoyancy is about coming back. Clarity is about being able to understand what you offer and being able to articulate it clearly. So that goes back to the attunement. So first you listen, and then you clearly indicate how you can offer value to your customer, or in this case, employer. That's the kind of the new ABCs. Alan, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I like this. I had to Google what the word attunement meant, because my language, even though English is my first language, I didn't know what that meant, but I guess it makes sense now. And you do need to attune yourself. You need to understand what that hiring manager, what that recruiter, what that individual is looking to buy. And you need to position yourself effectively to that person, that role, and so forth, because that is the person you're trying to influence. And if you cannot attune yourself and you cannot market yourself effectively to meet the needs of that buyer of your time or your impact, they're not going to take a flyer on you. So you first need to do that. And the buoyancy part, that word I knew. That word, and I like your weeble wobble thing and those punching bag things. I remember those as a kid. I think we're probably the same age, so we remember that stuff. I actually had a patent on Weeble Wobbles as a sports giveaway item at one point, but we'll talk about that some other time. But on the buoyancy side, we usually call that resiliency or grit here. That's what Angela Duckworth calls it. You do need to be comfortable with that. Or if not, you have to stop beating yourself up for getting rejected. Last time I interviewed for a job, I applied to 300 roles. I got 47 interviews. I got 20 final rounds, 5 offers. But if you look at that, 295 out of those 300 applications, I got rejected. And 165 out of those 295, I got ghosted. So I could either choose to bounce back up, or I could think about it, oh, nobody wants to talk to me. Nobody wants to hire me. I suck. There were things that I could learn and improve, and I did get some good feedback along the way. So you don't want to just keep bouncing back and forth without improving yourself as you bounce back up. But that resiliency, that buoyancy is critical. On the clarity, I think that is, I don't know, they're all important, but clarity, having the clarity of where you are looking to sell into, where you are looking to go, that is so critical. And that's why the giveaway item that we have at the end of this session is on those top 100 target company lists. Because as Stephen Covey says in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the second habit is start with the end in mind. So if you don't have that clarity about where you want to go, what's important to you, what sort of companies and organizations can help you get there, it's damn hard to sell anything, let alone sell something yourself or rent yourself or lease yourself to a good organization. So first get that clarity, or we'll go in the order here. First, understand how to attune yourself to the role. You need to have that resiliency. And if you expect that the next job that you apply for, you are going to get hired for, reach out to me, because that would be a total shocker. And on the clarity side, that's key. And that's what we're trying to leave you with here today.
So I'll say one more thing on clarity is less is more. And one of the risks when you're trying to position yourself for a role is to say, look at these 40 things I've done. A lot of the people that Alan and I work with are executives who have long careers, who have lots of experience, maybe even lots of different companies on their resume. And it's tempting to feel like you have to explain all of these different things. The reality is that for you to land the right job, you probably only need to connect 2 or 3 things to what they're looking for and what you have to offer. They're not looking to match 10 items with 10 qualities. I think ultimately that if you have 2 or 3 key core pieces of what they need and you can demonstrate, that's it. And the only way you're going to know what that is by listening first and then being able to match those 2. There's a whole process for doing that. We'll talk about that here in a moment.
Yeah, I think you're making it very easy for them to make the connection through all of this. And it requires work on your part, but the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
Alan, how can we not feel gross or arrogant when we advocate for ourselves?
Yeah, this is a particularly common theme that people feel like, and I know, Katie, you felt like this as you joined Kadima and sold our products for a while in solutions, about like feeling slimy, feeling pushy, not feeling authentic. And first off, you need to get over a little bit of advocating for yourself. My mom used to call it tooting your own horn. So you do need, I don't think she created that term, I think, but that's what she always say to us, or to me as a kid, that you need to learn to toot your horn. And we all have great attributes, and it's all about positioning it. So so on the slimy stuff, if you feel like you authentically can communicate the value that you bring, and everybody out there has value, has strengths. I've yet to meet someone that does not have strengths in some areas. Your strength may not be the area that the person wants to hire for, and that's why it's critical for the attunement part to understand what you are strong at and how to, like, who would be interested in that. But if you are truly advocating for yourself, communicating that value that you have brought in the past that you can continue to bring in the future, it should not be slimy. You are actually bringing value to people. And when a company or anyone is renting you or paying you salary, the company is not doing that out of their own goodwill. They're assuming that if they're paying you $200,000, they're getting $400, $500, $600, $1 million of value out of you. It's not charity. So you are providing them value. When you talk to other individuals, when you're trying to build those relationships and try to get advocates, whether it's someone that's going to give you a role right there. Maybe they're the hiring manager, which is the decision maker. Maybe they're the recruiter, which is a gatekeeper. Maybe they're a referral, which is an influencer. In any of those situations, if you can effectively communicate the value and the experience and the talent that you have in an authentic, concise, clear way, when you find those people that are looking for those sort of strengths and values, they're going to gobble you up. So you got to get comfortable with that. And if you're not comfortable and you do still think that's slimy, what you're doing is a disservice to yourself, because there are other candidates that are getting up to the plate and are effectively able to communicate their value to the team. So you don't think it's selling, think of it as communicating your value, your experience, your talents in a clear, concise way so that people can understand it. Don't go on 3 minutes or less is your tell me about yourself, your narrative. And if you can't tell your story in less than 3 minutes, good luck finding someone who wants to listen to you more than those 3 minutes. And Mark, looks like you were going to add something there.
You're telling a story, right? So selling sounds slimy. So forget about selling for a moment and just think about it as telling a story. You're telling a story to someone who is going to value what you have to offer. So I can't see the comments, but I saw that Alan, you mentioned something about somebody being in a software development role.
Yeah.
If you're in a software development role, I'm going to assume that you're good at it. You have a certain level of skill and ability. And of course, there are probably developers out there who are more skilled, have more background, more experience, more talent. And there are people who have less skill, less experience, less talent. So you're somewhere on that spectrum. So you have value to offer. So what you're trying to communicate is, this is the value that I offer. I have worked on these kinds of projects. I have done this kind of development work. I have this many years of experience. I've worked on these platforms. I have experience with these languages and these protocols. You're telling that story, and that is valuable. And so part of sales is getting the opportunity to tell the story. So for a lot of people, if I say, here's a hiring manager and I want you to go talk to them, they want to talk to you about your job, that's not too scary. But what is scary is getting to that meeting. And that's the sales part. That's the reaching out. And we're going to talk about this in a moment, but there's a whole process to like getting to that meeting. So if you want to have that opportunity to tell your story, you have to get to that meeting. And getting to that meeting is going to require some resiliency, some pushing through a process. So in fact, I think that's our next point.
Yes. And something that I actually got from you, Mark, when I think you're about to talk about informational interviews, is you're going to make those people look good if you get that opportunity. Yeah. And that you come from a place, and Alan, like very Kadima-ish, you're coming from a place of wanting to help. And so if you have that opportunity to help someone, you'll do that. Anyway, go.
And before Mark leads into this, let me just give a heads up for everybody we have about 100 people on this LinkedIn Live, which is awesome. We will stick around for questions. We're going to go 15 minutes over because of the huge crowd and the great questions. We'll stay till 45 minutes after the hour.
Awesome. Cool. So I'll try and tighten this up so we have plenty of time for questions. Sales funnel. So you want to get to that meeting. You want to get to that opportunity to tell your story, to be able to connect what they need to what you have to offer. And by the way, too, I'll just go ahead and throw out that it is not just listening in a conversation, it's doing your research as well. So doing your homework, doing your background analysis, figuring out what it is about this company that you want to connect with. But at the end of the day, companies are looking to add people to their team because they have a need. They have a real need, and you want to fill that need. So if you reach out to a company and you have a good service to offer, I'm a programmer, I have programming skills, I want to offer my programming skills to you, company, then why would they not want to talk with you? Why would they be annoyed if you reach out to them? They're not going to be annoyed. They're going to be delighted. They're looking for people. They're looking for talented people. So you need to reach out. Now, a sales funnel is called a funnel because it's shaped like this. The concept of a sales funnel is at the top, you have all the different organizations that you're looking to go after. Okay. If you're in sales and you're selling a product, there's all the companies that would potentially need your product. If you're selling your talent as a service, there's all the companies that could use your talent, right? So let's take the example of the developer. You have development skills. You're looking for companies that are developing software, either for themselves internally or to sell to a market. So that's most companies these days because everything is technical. So lots of opportunities for you there. So you have to develop this list of what are all the companies I want to go after. And that's one of the things that Alan has to offer here at the end of the program. And you can develop your own list. You can start with Alan's list and then work off of that and start from there. That's exactly what I did. You develop that list. Then you start going after opportunities to connect with people in those companies. And you slowly then identify specific job opportunities, and then you apply for those job opportunities. And then ideally you get some interview opportunities, and those interview opportunities lead to first there's like a screening interview, then a detailed interview, and then you get a job offer. So that's the funnel. But you're not going to get 10 companies, 10 job opportunities, 10 interviews, 10 job offers. That doesn't work like that, right? It's more like 100 companies narrowed down to 40 good opportunities, narrowed down to 20 job applications, narrowed down, and so on. And Alan can walk you through the process that Kadima does with that. It's fantastic. So the bottom line, though, is you got to start with a lot, and then you're narrowing it down over time. So one of the things that a lot of people struggle with that is a very salesy thing to do is reaching out to people to try and connect and get an informational interview. What I have found is that you can follow a pretty straightforward process that will help you get informational interviews. And the purpose of the informational interview is a tune. It's not getting a job. It's learning about the company. It's learning about the company and connecting with the people so that when you do get the job interview opportunity, you know exactly what you're doing. So that when you're looking at the job descriptions, okay, like I was interested in Adobe, and Adobe has multiple different business units. And what I was curious to know is like, how do they structure their sales organization? Is it all one sales organization that rolls up into a head of sales for the whole company? Or do they have 3 separate sales divisions for each of their different business divisions? And then how do they sell to a big company if they're selling 3 different products across 3 different divisions? So I wanted to learn about that. So I found people who were part of the sales organization in Adobe, and I've tried to look for something that we had in common. I found that we live in the same town, and and they are working at Adobe in sales. That happened to be narrow enough for me because I live in the Nashville area, not a ton of Adobe people here. So that narrowed it down pretty small. I reached out to those people and just said, hey, I'm interested in learning about Adobe. Would you be willing to spend 15 minutes talking to me? And I got a bunch of great responses. So now I learned about Adobe so that when I'm looking at those job opportunities, I can see these are the ones that I'm the most interested in. And when I get that opportunity to have a screening conversation, I know what I'm talking about. I know that this is for this division because I've learned about it. Job descriptions are not always super clear, especially in the larger companies where there's lots of divisions, lots of different types of roles. Sometimes the job titles all sound the same, but the job descriptions are very different. You're trying to figure out like, where does this fit? So having those informational interviews is super, super important for that process.
Yeah, I want to add too much more there, except it's a sales funnel. Like I didn't realize, like I was not a trained sales professional like Mark was. Mark's had more formal sales roles, and he helped me to understand that the process that we take here is a sales pipeline. It's basically account-based sales. So you, like, without getting into the strong details of what we're doing here, is once you identify those target organizations, you need to influence people within those walls to increase the likelihood that you proceed down that funnel. And that funnel starts with thousands of resumes. And in the case of a recent Google role that I heard about, 18,000 resumes at the top of the funnel that goes into the recruiter screen. And the recruiter's looking at those resumes for 6 to 60 seconds. That goes into the hiring manager, which is the hiring manager is only talking to 5 or 10 people. That go to the loops, that's 3 to 5 people. That go to the offer, which is usually just 1. So you're competing with that 18,000 for some roles to get that one role. And it's that funnel. And if you do things properly, you can increase the likelihood that you continue to proceed through that funnel until that offer. And I won't beat this one too much because I know we are at time and we have a lot of good questions.
I'll say one more thing that I didn't want to miss. In sales, one of the things that is suggested in marketing and sales is to always have a clear, singular call to action.
CTA.
So, CTA. Every time you send an email to anyone, there should always just be one request. Don't ask for 2 things. Don't ask for A or B. Always just ask for one thing. And don't forget to ask for one thing. If you say, reach out on LinkedIn and say, hey, you look interesting, I'd like to connect. It's what's the ask? You want to have an ask. So I would like to meet with you for 15 minutes. Now they can say yes or no. It's as clear as that. Once you've had a conversation with them and maybe you hit it off and now you're looking at job opportunities, the call to action would be, I'm interested in applying for some roles. Would you be willing to be a referral for me? And then the answer is yes or no. So you always want to make sure there's one very clear call to action in every communication.
I think we're going to have our CTA very quickly here.
Yes. Real quick from both of you. If people leave here with nothing else, I want to hear your one takeaway. Alan, go first.
My one takeaway is it's a war of attrition. My one takeaway is go to every opportunity, assuming the worst, but hoping for the best. Get lots of opportunities out there. Build your pipeline up top. Optimize for the funnel and land those roles, land multiple opportunities so that you can charge the most for your talents as a service.
Great. I would say listen before you speak. That's probably the most critical thing. And the second is that to develop a funnel, really be thinking about a total funnel. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yes, that's awesome. And then real quick, here's some links coming at you in the chat. Lex is going to drop our top 100 companies in the chat. And then next week, we have another session with Brianna Rooney about how to make a recruiter your ally. She's going to drop the link for that. We hope to see you then. And as well as our feedback form, if you want these links, you can opt into it there. Please tell us what you thought and how we can improve. And then I'm just going to hit the back button.
We just totally screwed up on Mark's advice to have one CTA because we just
way more than one CTA. We hope you can handle it.
But they're all good ones. And this first one, the top 100 list, again, as you think, totally free, grab this. This will help you identify that top of the funnel, how to start targeting those. And then next week with Brianna coming, she's a recruiter. So Mark is someone who landed a job through this process. I am a former hiring manager and someone who has landed jobs through this process. Next week, we have Brianna Rooney coming on. She is an expert recruiter. The recruiter, she knows the inside, outside of that game. Do join us next week on that. But let's get to the questions.
Yes, we have 7 minutes. So.
Okay, 7 minutes. Let's do
lightning round.
Let's do rapid fire. I'll read these questions. I think I'm looking at the same sheet. So, do you have any tips for how to reestablish connections or recover when you feel like you've started to come off the wrong way in an interview? Mark, if you can answer that briefly.
I really don't, honestly.
Okay.
I think once it gets off, it's extremely hard to get it back.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think do what you can, take as many swings at the plate as you can. And if you strike out on that one, there's more. But learn from your mistakes so that you don't make that same mistake going forward.
It's another reason to have lots of opportunities.
Next one. How do you end an interview strong after you've asked the HR manager follow-up question? How do you end an interview strong, Mark? How would you recommend ending an interview strongly?
Yeah, I think the key thing there is that call to action. It's what is the next step in this process and how soon should I expect to hear from you? That's a key thing, is to ask how soon I should expect to hear from you. Because if you say something like, well, the ball's in your court, I look forward to hearing from you, it's too vague. You want them to say, you should hear from us by next Friday. The reason you need to get that date is because then if you don't hear from them, you have a permission now to follow up with them. Super important. Get a date.
Awesome. And if they don't give you a date, then you can say, hey, is it okay if I follow up with you next week? So they put the date there and then you follow up and you keep the ball in your court.
Yep, exactly. Clear next steps. Always have a clear next step.
Yes. What's your take on creating a website for someone for your job search, and or using an app or a site that helps you create a self-promotion video? I'm in marketing and I don't like these things, but it might be worthwhile because of self-marketing component. I'll answer first. This stuff is usually bullshit and a big waste of time if you are forwarding to a website or your information, unless you are in this very creative industry. If you're like in web design or you're in video content production, that could be valuable. Outside of that, it's not usually a good use of your time. You want to interact with people in a more traditional way that they're used to consuming information. And I also don't think the time of investing in that sort of strategy, which I know there's some career coaches out there that do say to do that. I think you spend way too much time up top of the funnel and most of that will get ignored, and you won't get through to the bottom of the funnel of consideration and hiring. Mark, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
I'm going to take a counterpoint. So here's my counterpoint. If you're going after an opportunity at a big company, I 100% agree with what Alan just said. Big companies have a process. That's not going to fit in their process, so it's not going to get seen. If you're going after a startup, which is one of my specialties, I've worked in a lot of startups. I hired a lot of startups. I'm in a startup now as a COO, and I'm hiring a lot. In that situation, it's almost the opposite. The unique approach, the kind of different approach actually may get seen, and it may differentiate you. So I think it depends on what kind of organization you're going after.
I think it's a fair point. I think with a smaller organization with startups, those relationships that you build are even more valuable as well. So you can,
yeah. For sure.
Next one. What are your thoughts on cold outreach to hiring managers and or recruiters on specific roles that you've applied for? And how do you deal with a talent acquisition team that completely goes dark for weeks? So the first one, cold outreach to hiring managers and recruiters on specific roles that you've applied for. I would not do that unless you have gotten that information through normal channels. I would not try to stalk or hunt somebody down like that. I would have an advocate do that on your behalf internally at the company. And for reaching out to recruiters, if it's a small company, going back to Mark's point, you might want to try that route. If it's a large company or a highly attractive company, good luck getting the recruiter's attention. It's just a big waste of your time.
You don't want to be on a fly in the anointment. If Google is looking at 18,000 applicants for one job, you're not going to reach that recruiter. You're not going to be able to talk to them. So I 100% agree with what Alan is saying. I also would say, again, at a startup, totally different vibe. And the person who shows that kind of pursuit, that shows that tenacity, that's actually attractive to me as a hiring manager in a startup. So I like that hunt. But in a large company, it's just not going to work. It's a waste of time.
And then on the second question, how do you deal with a talent acquisition team that completely goes dark for weeks? First off, use that advice that Mark said. So try to get that date of when they should follow up with you and own that date. And if they don't get back to you after that, move on to your next. There's nothing you are going to do. If they went dark on you, it means they're likely not interested in you, especially if you sent them a reminder or two. When transitioning careers and you have extensive experience of 18 plus years, sometimes it's taken as a negative as promoting. How can you sell that experience? I think I deal with people all the time that talk about ageism as a negative. I'm 50 years old, so I don't know if that's considered young or old. I guess for my kids, it seems really old. Some of our clients, it seems young. It depends on your relationship to the age of 50. But that experience lends lots of good star stories that you can convey. It lends lots of great information, lots of great relationships that can work to your advantage and can also help you land a job that has larger scope and larger impact. So I see that ageism works positively as often, if not more, than negatively. Mark, I don't know if you're older or younger than 50.
I'm north of 50. Yeah, so I think that the key thing here is the person who is described as promoting or who is seen as promoting is probably because they weren't listening first. So if you're just coming out of the gate like, boom, look at all these things, you're not mapping your thing to their need. So this is a classic sales mistake. A lot of salespeople start selling their product without listening to the need. Terrible mistake, and people do it all the time. It's a very common sales mistake. Salespeople do this all the time. It's a terrible mistake. You want to know what their needs are, map your experience to their needs. If you have 18 years of experience or more, I have 25 years of experience, you're going to have lots of options to pull from. So listen and then find those unique, specific experiences you have that you can map to and bring them up.
We got 2 more questions. I'll go through the last 2, or maybe more, because I see 3 more questions. So we'll go through those super quick. How can you effectively present your qualifications in an interview when the hiring manager has less experience than you? First off, I'll go attunement. Understand who your audience is. If the hiring manager has less experience than you, you do not want to make them feel less experienced than you. You want to position yourself as someone that can bring some experience to go along with the team and to appreciate how that may complement it. Who gives a shit if the person is less qualified, more qualified, whatever? That person has decision-making ability to figure out if they want to pay you a salary as a talent as a service. Get the fucking job. Then you can worry about what experience that person has. Mark.
With him. If you haven't heard it, think about this. What's in it for me? You want to know what's in it for me for that hiring manager. So what is the hiring manager's with him? Why should they hire you? If you have tons of experience, great. Map it to their needs. What you don't want to do is come across as, oh, I'm more experienced than you. You should hire me. Heck, I could be your boss. That would be obviously a massive mistake. But you want to map it to their with them. So if they're honestly the very best hiring managers at Amazon, they have a rule. You should be hiring people who are better than you. So there's nothing wrong with having more experience, having more knowledge, having been more of an expert maybe than the person that's hiring you. But you don't want to couch it as you're better than them. You want to couch it as I have a lot of value to bring and I want to map it to your needs. So you really need expertise in this area. I have a lot of expertise in this area. I would love to help you. I would love to make your team successful, and I'd love to be a part of your team.
What are some tips to train and retain your buoyancy muscles? And I think, Mark, the way you consider buoyancy, same as resilience, or is it different?
Yeah, you just have to do it. You just do it, and then you do it again, and then you do it again. If you guys have heard this, but the athlete, you have to be an athlete to then do what an athlete does to then get what an athlete gets. So first it has to start here. You have to be. And so I'd say you just have to go out and do it. There's no way to train it.
The first time you get rejected will really suck. The second time will suck a little bit less. The 100th you get rejected, it will just roll off your back.
Water off a duck's back. Let's go.
Yeah. Last one. And I'm someone who's gotten rejected a lot. Maybe that's why Mark and I have so little hair left. Is there an effective way to overcome your overqualified response in an interview when you genuinely want the job? So go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, if somebody said that to me, I would imagine, let's say it's an IC role, individual contributor role, and I have a lot of experience as a manager and even a manager of managers and managing whole divisions and teams and companies. And I'm looking at an IC role, someone's, aren't you going to want to be a manager? My response to that would be, this has to be true. Okay, first of all, this has to be true. But if it is true, it's, you know what, actually, I have a lot of experience managing. At this time in my life, what I'd really like to do is just focus on doing something really well. So I'm really excited about this opportunity to do something different than what I've done in the past.
I think that's great advice. The one thing I'd add is focus on the companies, because some companies that are very high quality companies will hire people that are overqualified for the job. They do that intentionally and they pay you well for that, and you will learn. I've been at other companies that they've turned me down because they said you will get bored here or you're overqualified for. And while I was upset that I lost those roles, in hindsight, looking back at where those companies are now, they did me a favor.
Yep.
So focus on
it. Might be good advice.
Yeah. So don't fight it too much. If people are saying you're overqualified and you will be bored, you can push a little bit, but they might be giving you a good warning. Cool. So Katie, anything else that we need to cover before we wrap this up? And this went record-breaking time, 50 minutes. So
there's questions. Hooray. We love you.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Mark, for joining. Thank you, Katie, for joining us on task here. And thank you for the 90 people that are out there in the LinkedIn interwebs. Do join our call next Wednesday, where we're going to go deep into inside baseball game of recruiting and hiring manager perspective. And Mark, any last words that you have? I think you may have 3 words to share with people.
Upward and onward.
Okay.